Hey everyone, today I wanted to go over another discussion topic regarding what we'll be able to see for the big 3.0 update on Monster Hunter Rise for the Nintendo Switch. And towards the back end of the video, I also want to discuss on what we can expect to see for Monster Hunter Stories 2, since this video is mostly going to focus on Rise just for now. Do keep in mind that this isn't necessarily insider information, since a lot of this has kind of already been known publicly for quite a bit, and mostly just going over the details and compiling all the information together so we can begin to set expectations properly, since I have seen a rather robust set amount of comments where people are kind of expecting the world. They're expecting a whole heck of a lot of things that for no real reason are kind of like being tossed around as something that we can potentially see, where there's no real reality or basis as to some of the ideas being thrown around, and I do want to discuss those to a certain degree. But right away, I want to start the discussion talking about what we will be seeing. And first, right away, it shouldn't necessarily come to much of a surprise that All Mother Narwa will be basically at the forefront of what we'll be seeing at the big 3.0 update. This is the big final boss for the game. Capcom has been touting it for a couple of months now, since basically the launch of the game, when they let us know that, hey, we will be seeing the end of the game at a future update. And this is that update. I think the only thing that we don't necessarily know regarding All Mother Narwa, which I think is still just a monster title, it doesn't necessarily mean that will be its actual name, is it actually the offspring of Ribushi and Narwa, or is it a merging of both of them together? We do know that they don't necessarily die off as you are fighting them. During the Rampage fight, Ibushi does escape. Narwa does go underground as you fight her in the coral lair, or the coral area. So we do know that they aren't necessarily dead. So there's also talk about them mating. So potentially this could be their kid that you're going to end up fighting, this all-powerful version of their, of them being together. Or is them just actually merging into just one creature? Or, as one of the original insider information confirmed, you actually get to fight both of them at the same time. So they do split off and then they unite. That could also be suggested. I haven't heard much about that in a long time, so the only reason why I'm bringing it up is trying to figure out and brainstorm what could this actual fight end up being. But ultimately, it's most likely going to be one of those things, obviously. Another one of those big things that people just keep hoping for and they keep reiterating that they want to see is obviously Crimson Glow Valstrax. And the reason for that is because we've known for quite a while that Valstrax is going to be part of this game. I feel like this is now a make or break moment for this monster, specifically for this game. If we don't see Valstrax in this 3.0 update, it's not happening. There has been a lot of discussion because some of the monsters like Basil, for example, wasn't necessarily supposed to be part of 2.0, that perhaps, they shifted positions. Maybe Valstrax was supposed to be part of 2.0, but then they pushed it back so they could, reshift them around. Whatever ultimately ended up happening, Valstrax is either coming or not, and I feel like this is it. If it doesn't appear in this update, then I don't necessarily think it's actually going to happen. We do have several guided markers within the game where they mention a crimson creature within the game several times over, specifically in the desert. So we know that there's something pending with that specific wording within the game's information. We just simply haven't been able to see whatever that creature actually is. So for all of those who are been waiting for Valstrax, I think this is the make or break moment. This is a monster that pretty much right out of the gate, when we started getting information about this game, I feel like if we get it now, great. But if we don't, we can probably say goodbye to that idea altogether. Now, the only other new monster, quote unquote, that we can expect to see in this update is Apex Sinogre. We have expected to see this one for quite a bit as well. Not as long as the other aforementioned ones, but Apex Sinogre is kind of like a no secret as well. It's kind of like a no-brainer. And Apex monsters are kind of like the de facto filler monsters that we are just going to constantly keep getting, depending on how Capcom is going to plan out that roadmap going forward. And that's something that I want to discuss, as after this update, we don't necessarily have any idea what's coming after. We expect to see, something of a Sizzler at the end of the trailer, that they're most likely going to show us with Narwa and, Valstrax or whatever. But after that, I don't necessarily know what's coming. And that's the thing. No one really knows as of this point in time. That information just isn't out there right now. So Apex Sinogre is expected. We'll most likely be able to see him. But other than that, it's kind of like a toss-up. we can expect very normal things like Apex Diablo and Apex Rathalos coming over to normal hunts. So they will most likely get their very own quest where you can go ahead and fight them, you know, out in the wild. They will no longer be locked to Rampage original battles, you know, like they are right now. You know, you'll be able to fight them out in the wild, as you have with Arceros, Mitsuzune, and Rathian. So expect to see that as well. I wouldn't necessarily expect them to make this a big deal since, you know, they're just a continuation of it. But normal fights for Apex, Diablos, and Rathalos are pretty much expected, so that's almost a lock and a guarantee. I'm not too worried about that. When it does come to speculation, though, I do think that a lot of people are getting very excited with the idea that there's going to be another big secret like there was with Bazelgeuse, right? Basil just kind of showed up out of nowhere. He was supposed to be part of the 3.0 update originally, but he showed up in the 2.0 update. This was the big surprise, the thing that almost no one expected. And because of that, I've seen a lot of people throw the name around that Devil Joe that will be the surprise monster for this update. And I don't necessarily know where they're getting this information from, because there's no data provided ever anywhere that Devil Joe is part of this game. He is an intruder type like Basil, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's just going to show up and be a secret, you know, monster that we're going to be able to fight. There's just nothing in the information that we know so far stating that Devil Joe will be part of this game. Now, that doesn't mean that in the future update he wouldn't necessarily show up, or even in the G rank update that we can expect for next year. But for right now, we just have no real reason to believe that Devil Joe will be part of this. So perhaps wind that down for a little bit, or at least until we get more concrete information within the next few days. What I do think is more realistic is probably more Apex monsters, because ultimately those are the fillers like I mentioned before. And Apex Tigrex or even Apex Rajang make a whole heck of a lot more sense for them to just add as filler, and then focus on All Mother Narwa and Crimson Grove Valstrax as the big feature new monsters, where they could just add more Apexes as filler. Remember that we can even end up having things in the near future updates like Apex Lagambi or stuff like that, like Apex Royal Ludroth. Just filler monsters that don't necessarily add anything to the conversation, but they're just stuff that they could just put into a list of things and say like, hey, we added 5 new monsters, you know. So Capcom is known for doing that kind of thing. This is where Deviants came from, the alternate monsters and stuff like that, the idea came from. So, you know, it wouldn't necessarily surprise me if they add just more Apexes to the roster, and Tigrex and Rajang are pretty much prime candidates for this. So I'm not saying that they're necessarily going to happen, but if I were to like put money down right now, I would probably bet one of those two guys will probably show up. Shifting away from monsters though, we also know that there's a couple of weapon tiers that are missing for some of the elder weapons, and even like, you know, Mitsuzune and a couple of other monsters. There's just an entire tier of weapons missing for some of these weapons that should be unlocked within this big 3.0 update. Remember that the last 2.0 update had a massive list of things that weren't necessarily like highlight big reveals or big twists, but they made so many changes, you know, especially like the decorations and stuff that completely changed the meta. And now adding a bunch of new weapons that basically are just tier updates with, you know, higher damage outputs and stuff like that wouldn't necessarily come to me as a big surprise. So it's something that we can probably easily expect to see going forward. Another thing that we can easily pretty much guarantee that we'll be seeing is the DLC pack 3.0. This brings with it a paid layered armors, paid skins for the Kahoot, layered skins for the Palamute and the Palico, you know, a bunch of goodies in that regard, more hairstyles, more face paintings, more gestures, more poses, and perhaps even more hunter voices. And I would expect there to see Yomogi and Iori, the chef and the buddy handler, as perhaps new hunter voices. So, you know, when it comes to that kind of stuff, it is paid DLC, but they do sell them standalone as well. Maybe even new stickers. That's also another easy guarantee that we can expect to see. So things are just gonna be filling out that whatever big filler list that they're gonna put out there that you know, we're most likely gonna be able to see. And going forward, like I mentioned casually just earlier, I do expect them to show us a little bit of a roadmap. And the question is, and I talked about this in a video a couple of days ago, what are we looking at in the near future? Are they gonna do a big 4.0 update with another big set of a bunch of new monsters, 4 to 5 new monsters, or even more Apexes going forward? Or are we gonna regress back to the old school way that they used to do it, where they would just give us one new monster per update, and then that was it? You know, Monster Hunter World, that was it. Iceborne, it was no different. one big monster, you know, a couple of quality of life changes, a couple of updates here or there, but then they would just do that every couple of months. I don't necessarily know if they're going to go back to that, or they're going to keep with the ongoing theme of a 4.0, 5.0, and even 6.0 updates as we head into the big, you know, Monster Hunter G rank update by the end of the year, or maybe even the beginning of next year. So it is going to be interesting what that roadmap is going to look like. I think out of everything that we're going to see, most likely that's going to be the biggest factor going forward. How much of the update path is going to change, what that roadmap is going to show us, because it's probably going to dictate the life cycle of this game. However long people are going to keep playing it is going to be based off of what that roadmap looks like and how many more monsters and how many more quality of life changes they can add to the game, so we can actually have a pretty good idea of how long people are going to be playing it. And I guess lastly, the thing that I'll talk about is Monster Hunter Stories 2. We're most likely going to get a trailer. That's pretty much a no-brainer. They did drop the story trailer just a few days ago. So I think they're focusing more now on just monsters, because that's the thing that I talked about before. Basically, we know there's over 100 monsters in that game. They've shown about 26 of them so far. So we do know that there's a pretty hefty, good chunk of monsters that they're going to show. About half of them are probably not going to get shown. So expect to see about 6 to 7 new monsters in this new trailer, and most likely a couple of new combat mechanics, which they talked about in the last thing, but they didn't go into detail. And also I would expect them to show off more of the cities, because that game is very open area and is very based on the cities that you're visiting, the little towns that are spread out everywhere. So you are going to be able to see just the town and then the adjacent areas that you can actually visit and travel to, and it's very focused in that regard. Area exploration and monster diversity, which is something that they're really going to be focusing as we basically wind down even more Monster Hunter Rise updates and they shift into higher focus on Monster Hunter Stories 2. But that's going to be it for this video. Hopefully you guys found it informational. If you're brand new to my channel, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Hit the bell to receive notifications when the videos go up. And as always, thank you so much for watching. See ya.